motivated and energized to not only have a successful convention, to not only communicate to the country why they think it would be better for America to re-elect former President Trump, but to devote themselves maybe even with more energy than they thought they would be bringing to this arena for this convention. And that's an unpredictable X factor, but it is clear to me in my conversations with delegates here, they are aware of the sense of peril this weekend, and they believe that former President Trump survived for a reason, and they want to see that reason through. And they have told me that they want to continue and redouble their efforts on his behalf. For more insight into that, and I want to go down to our colleague Ed O'Keefe, who is on the convention floor, right near, as I understand it, Ed, the Ohio delegation, which may loom large as this afternoon plays out.
There it is again. Thank you. It's back.
Ed, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ed O'Keefe,
Major,
on the convention
how are you?
floor. Can you hear me? Hello, Ed. How are you?
I can, Major Garrett. How are you? I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good, good.
Day one of a convention. The roll call underway. A lot of anticipation here in the Buckeye States corner, Major, as we continue to wait for who exactly it might be that ends up being Donald Trump's running mate. We now know, of course, Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor, out. Marco Rubio, the Florida governor, out. That leaves JD Vance as the only other guy that was on that widely circulated three-man shortlist. And as of now, at least, the delegation isn't tipping its hat if it knows, or its hand if it knows. And like everyone else is waiting in anticipation for what might transpire. But of course, we're in the midst of that one little piece of accounting they have to do to get things started, and that is nominate Donald J. Trump to be the nominee. What is the magic number again? You might ask, 1,215, I believe it says on your screen. Delegates needed to win of the 2,429 that are in attendance. And they're going through that right now. This is an audience that seems quite eager to be here, seems quite resolved about what's coming in November. And I'd been hearing, I don't know about you, Major, from various people, that while the situation on Saturday night was incredibly horrific and unexpected and rattling, not necessarily something that has thrown the party off its game. If anything, has given them just more resolve to keep fighting into November.
No question, Ed. And it was very clear, even hours after those shocking and traumatic events in Butler, Pennsylvania, Saturday evening, as I talked to people who were part of the host committee and preparing for things here, it was former President Trump's message almost instantaneously, as soon as he got to the hospital and was basically okay and fine, to let everyone here in Milwaukee know, full speed ahead, do not change the schedule, do not change anything about our plans. Don't suggest to the country that this is in any way going to dislodge or derail our plans for a 4-day convention to talk about our plans for the future, which is what all national party conventions are. A reflection on whatever's been accomplished, or in this case, for Republicans who've been out of power for 3.5 years, what you intend to change for the country based on your criticisms of the existing Biden administration. The former president told everyone here in Milwaukee, stay on course, keep the schedule as it is. I think it is clear, Ed, and it's been my conversations, as I'm sure they have been with you, shared by people here, that the speeches will change in tone and tenor. That's an evolving process, reflective of what happened over the weekend, but this convention is going on, and there is tremendous anticipation in this arena, Fiserv Forum, for the most important announcement this afternoon, who the running mate will be for the former president.
And one other note on that, while there is anticipation, we had a conversation with a Virginia delegate a few moments ago, one of their national committeemen, so loyal to the former president, who said to us, it's not really going to matter who it is. If people are voting this year, they're voting for him, Trump. They're not worried about the running mate. Yes, that person has to be there. This is a race that's built around the top of that ticket, and they don't expect any attempt to get a moderate on there, or even somebody that might be equally, if not a little more conservative than him, is going to make that much of a difference. If you're voting, she said, you're voting for Trump whether you like him or you don't like him. If you don't like him, you vote against him. If you like him, you'll be with him, no matter who it is.
No question about that, Ed. That has been the defined reality of vice presidential picks in modern American presidential history. They don't play a decisive role in the ultimate outcome of an election, but I think it will be fair to say many in this arena and many across the country will take some measure of analysis of how the president, former President Trump, made this decision. And did he do so to enlarge the electoral map? That's why this afternoon there's been a little bit of buzz around Glenn Youngkin, the Virginia governor. Or will he do something that is consistent with where his messaging is and where the next generation of Republicans to follow the Trump messaging is likely to take it? That would be JD Vance, though he's very young, 39, only a year and a half in the United States Senate. He would be on the relatively less experienced side of the spectrum. But we've already learned this afternoon that two people with much more experience, Marco Rubio and Doug Burgum, have been crossed off the list. So how the former president arrives at this decision, communicates it to the nation, and what it's supposed to mean for that tandem, I think will be scrutinized in light of the weekend's events, and how the campaign under former President Trump's leadership will make the messaging of this running mate and the former president part of the national conversation. Ed, any thoughts on that? So, Lindsay, what happens oftentimes in convention situations is we have lots of different moving parts. Live TV is nothing if not relentlessly interesting. Let me toss it back to you because Ed O'Keefe is moving on to some other obligations here on the convention floor.
Sounds good, Major. And I have with me here in Studio 57 in New York City, CBS's Director of Elections and Polling, Anthony Salvanto. Thank you so much for being with us. And I want to talk about what's happening right now on the ground. But first, because you are the guru of all things polling, we know that Saturday's events changed things irreparably. What do we know about the polling pre-Saturday about where Donald Trump was on the electoral map?
Well, going into those events, and I want to stress it was going into those events, our estimates for all the states were that in each and every one of the battleground states, the 7 states that we think will be decisive, Donald Trump had a narrow edge. And if you take that together, it means that he does have an easier path through the Electoral College, which, of course, decides the election. And then you put all those states together, and we're showing the graphic now, he's got that 2-point narrow edge across all of them. And that represents a shift from 2020 in Donald Trump's favor, all of which is to say, Lindsay, this race shifted a little bit towards Donald Trump after that first debate, and there was every indication that going into that, it stayed that way.
All right, let's go back to Major Garrett on the floor.
Lindsay, I want to read to you a Truth Social post from the former president. I'll cut to the chase. He has selected JD Vance as his running mate for the 2024 presidential campaign. Let me read this Truth Social post in toto. Quote, after lengthy deliberation and thought and considering the tremendous talents of many others, I have decided that the person best suited to assume the position of Vice President of the United States is Senator JD Vance of the great state of Ohio. Continuing, direct quotes. JD honorably served our country in the Marine Corps, graduated from Ohio State University in 2 years, summa cum laude, and is a Yale Law School graduate, where he was the editor of the Yale Law Journal and president of the Yale Law Veterans Association. JD's book, Hillbilly Elegy, became a major bestseller and movie, and it has championed the hardworking men and women of our country. JD had a very successful business career in technology. Again, I'm quoting this Truth Social post from the former president. And finance, and now during the campaign will be strongly focused on the people he fought so brilliantly for, the American workers and farmers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, and far beyond. There you have it. On Truth Social, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, officially announcing that J.D. Vance, 39-year-old senator from the state of Ohio, 1.5 years in the United States Senate, will be his running mate in the 2024 campaign.
Major, you had mentioned that he is a relatively political newcomer, 1.5 years in the Senate. We, of course, are familiar with his book that turned into the very popular movie. What do we know about his credentials that make him ready for the moment today?
Well, first and most importantly, he was able to patch up his differences with former President Trump. Anyone who does a quick internet search will find in 2016, not only was J.D. Vance critical of former President Trump, then a candidate for the Republican Party nomination for the first time in 2016, he was acidically critical of former President Trump, describing him in one article as potentially America's next Hitler, describing his particular rhetoric about helping the world class as rhetorical heroin. Highly critical of former President Trump seeking the Republican nomination in 2016. Those days are gone. And JD Vance has said publicly many times, the movement is larger than I thought it was, and it is time for me to suck it up and join this movement. And since he made that decision, as he prepared to run for the Senate in Ohio and won the endorsement of former President Trump, an endorsement, by the way, that catapulted him to the top of a very contested Republican primary and made him not only the nominee, but the future senator from Ohio, JD Vance has been not only the most stalwart, dependable, but most aggressive defender of former President Trump's approach on policy, politics, and even rhetoric. And for that reason, he rose to the top of this list and now has been chosen by the former president as his running mate in this campaign.
Just reiterating the fact that Vance has been in Trump's corner, making that appeal on television. In fact, he was just on Face the Nation with our own Margaret Brenner recently, and he was vigorously defending the fact that the former president needed immunity to do his job, as he believed, as future president. Of course, in the wake of that decision from the Supreme Court, he has defended the former president when it comes to January 6th. And he obviously came, as many in the nation did, after the attempted assassination on Saturday, to his corner, to his defense, actually posting on Twitter and alleging that it was the current president's own rhetoric that led us there, saying the central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. JD Vance on Twitter saying, on July 13th, just 2 days ago, the night of the attempted assassination, that rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. Of course, we know President Biden has tried to cool the temperature on both sides. Let's go back to you, Major, as we continue to watch the roll call here at the RNC with this major news of Trump picking JD Vance as his running mate.
And it's also worth pointing out that with this pick, former President Trump is signaling that what he wants on this ticket and what he wants for the future of the Republican Party is absolute cohesion with a Trump approach to policy and politics. JD Vance is the face of the next generation of Trumpism and Trumpism within the Republican Party. He wants to be that face, and now being chosen as former President Trump's running mate will be the choice, will be the face, rather, of that new Republican Party after former President Trump, should he be elected to a second term. I want to bring in, please, if I could, our political director, Finn Gomez. Finn, it's squeeze in here. Make sure we got plenty of room. We're all on the camera. Good, it's all great. We've got the right tie and everything.
That's right.
Finn, share with the audience your thoughts about JD Vance.
I think there was a lot of speculation that it would be JD Vance in the last few days. We did see, we had one of our reporters, Shauna Mazzell, out in Cincinnati, Ohio. We saw like a heavy security detail over the last couple of days, especially after the terrible events that occurred in Pennsylvania. We saw, a really heavy security detail, something we did not see with some of the other contenders. But I think with JD Vance, as you said, it's somewhat of a legacy pick as well. This is Trump can only be in for one term, as we know. He already served one term, as we know. So, this is someone who can take the MAGA reins, as you said. And if you recall, back in 2016. The Hillbilly Elegy was the book that he wrote. And it was awarded, highly heralded, and it really almost served as a blueprint and sort of a textbook to understand the base that helped propel Trump to that victory in 2016.
Essentially, for those who are not familiar with it, Hillbilly Elegy tells the story about JD Vance's extended family, and it is the story of economic isolation, seeing industry and economic opportunity drift slowly away from many parts of Appalachia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and also, and he writes very compellingly, movingly, painfully about how that sense of economic isolation, the receding of economic opportunities led to bad decisions, addiction and other things, other problems that he said were not only troubles for his family, but for many of the people he knew in the region he grew up in. Yet, at that time when Hillbilly Elegy was being celebrated, JD Vance then said, Trump doesn't know anything about this. his rhetoric speaks to these people, but they're going to be let down by former President Trump, then a candidate seeking the nomination in 2016. Right. As I mentioned a moment ago, he called his rhetoric rhetorical heroin.
Rhetorical heroin, yeah.
Those days, as I mentioned a moment ago, Finn, they're gone, and they are now connected at the hip politically, and in a few hours here on the convention floor, I believe we are expecting unanimous acclamation of this convention and the delegates, former President Trump's running mate.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note, he is a senator of Ohio. He's a junior senator of Ohio. There has been some softening in support for President Biden in those important Rust Belt states, in those blue wall states that he needs to win to get back, to win re-election.
Right.
And I think strategically, the Trump people think this is something I've been told this, that they believe that they can really do well. And I think with JD Vance, they feel they can do even better.
Let's break this down for the audience. Right now, former President Trump leads in the polls. He has an electoral map advantage. That is a fact. And the one strong remaining electoral path for President Biden to win re-election is dependent, 100% dependent on Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Right. It is no accident that in his Truth Social post announcing JD Vance as the running mate, former President Trump listed those states. Right. You can bet, and I can bet, Finn, that JD Vance is going to be circulating throughout those states relentlessly in this campaign. And we know that the Ohio delegation is coming up next. If it's all right with the control room, why don't we go down and listen to the floor in this moment. Let's go. Let's go to the floor.
Iowa, 79 delegates.
Madam Secretary Alex Triantafilou, Chairman of the Ohio Republican Party. I stand here today with my friend Bernie Moreno, who's going to retire forever, politician Sherrod Brown, and deliver a win to the United States Senate. We proudly cast our 79 votes for President Donald J. Trump and JD Vance.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures of this convention, Iowa, 79 votes, President Trump. America, Samoa, 9 delegates.
So we heard Finn, we heard from the Ohio delegation, not only the delegate votes for former President Trump, formulaic, and then the call, and JD Vance. Yeah. It's part of the electric moment here. The delegates on that floor are getting the information, and they just heard it called out, sort of officially, sort of semi-officially. It's an exciting moment.
It is, and I think even prior to this moment, I mean, speaking to some of the delegates on the floor and speaking to some delegates just arriving over the last couple of days, there is a sense, this palpable sense that they feel that they've turned a corner in the race. They feel there's momentum for Donald Trump. Frankly, after the debate in Atlanta and even after the events in Pennsylvania, they feel that they have this sense of momentum. We've been hearing from some of the delegates who have been repeating that now sort of very famous phrase, if you will, from Donald Trump after he was injured when he was shot at in the attempted assassination. When he turned to the cameras and said, "Fight, fight, fight," and you're hearing that. You're hearing that through on the floor. That it's breaking out sort of.
And it will be interesting, Finn. That we have, by the way, just to keep everyone track of what's going on the floor, 3 more states to work through the roll call process. But it'll be interesting, Finn, for all of us to sift how that message of fighting is conveyed rhetorically. Right. JD Vance jumped right into the fray in the immediate hours after the assassination attempt on former President Trump, essentially saying the rhetoric of the left brought us to this traumatic and potentially lethal moment. Right. Lots of other Republicans held back and didn't necessarily, and now there's been a call from the top of the Trump campaign, from former President Trump himself, and others, Steve Scalise, the House majority leader on the Republican side to say, no, 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 let's bring it down. What will JD Vance sound like here? What will others sound like as they talk about the fight? What is the fight about? What is the fight for? And who is that fight against? I'm going to be sifting, as everyone here will be, how personal that is or non-personal that is. Is it policy? Is it personality? Is it names? Is it party? Is it ideology? What is it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we did confirm that the president and the former president and the senior members of his campaign have told the organizers, have told the speakers to tone down the tenor following Pennsylvania. Tone it down. We don't need that rhetoric. We want to focus on unifying the party. And I think that's something that you will likely hear from JD Vance when he does address this crowd later this week. But you're right. Like, how is that going to play? It's playing well here on the delegate floor, with delegates on the floor. We know that, right? He's speaking, frankly, to the choir, right? But outside in those battleground states, in some of those states where that rhetoric may not be as accepted, like, how does that happen? So, but I do think that
Finn, let's listen to the floor. The process is about to wrap up.
Florida. Florida, 125 delegates.
Madam Secretary and everybody in this great city, on behalf of our entire family and on behalf of the 125 delegates in the unbelievable state of Florida, we hereby nominate every single one of them for the greatest president that's ever lived, and that's Donald J. Trump, hereby declaring him the Republican nominee for President of the United States of America.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures of this convention, Florida, 125 votes, President Trump.
A celebration that lasts throughout the year. So bring your good time and your laughter too. We gonna celebrate your party through. Come on. Celebration.
Over the top, you see it on the big screen here in Fiserv Forum. That is the Republican National Committee and attendant delegates' way of signaling to the nation and to the world that former President Donald Trump, for the third consecutive Republican convention, is the nominee of the party to seek the presidency in 2024. And that process was brought to dramatic conclusion by the Trump family. Eric, Don Jr., and Laura Trump, all there representing the Florida delegation. And we should note that the pick of JD Vance on the ticket for former President Trump is an internal victory for Don Trump Jr., a fierce advocate, very close to JD Vance, who'd been suggesting to his president, not to the former president and his father, for months that JD Vance was the best pick.
Right. He's been the biggest lobbyist, biggest champion, his biggest cheerleader. And if you recall, in 2016, it wasn't really until the family met with Mike Pence and his family before Donald Trump finally decided that it was going to be Mike Pence. Mike Pence wrote about it in his book, in his memoir, and it was really that moment. But it was really the approval of the family. And so when we heard that JD Vance was being really championed by Donald Trump Jr. and his family, and it was a good indicator that was a good likely pick, that it was going to happen.
No doubt, a very big moment for the Trump family, and we should remind ourselves, and this is something that everyone will evaluate, and history will take very careful note of. For politics and former President Trump, now the nominee officially of the Republican National Party, it's a family affair.
It's a family affair.
Deeply involved and enmeshed in his family, and the considerations, the big decisions flow through the family. And that collaboration has taken on visibility every single year of Trump being involved in the political life of our country.
Laura Trump, as you just mentioned, his daughter-in-law is literally leading the RNC.
The Republican National Committee, right.
Committee, correct.
Exactly. Let's go down to the floor and listen to Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, talking about Kentucky.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures of this convention, Kentucky, 46 votes, President Trump.
Kentucky's 46 delegates are in. We missed Mitch McConnell there. I'm sorry about that, folks. I was talking too much. That's a common affliction of mine.
But he got booed. He got booed. Did you hear that? Some of the folks booed him.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah.
Let us just say that the relationship between Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, and former President Trump has had its ups and downs.
That's for sure.
Lindsay, I want to throw you back to you in New York.
Sure. Thank you, Major and Finn. Back here with Anthony Salvanto here. So as we continue going down, Hawaii is up right now. Anthony, help us understand the significance of this moment in history and the formality, pomp and circumstance. What leads us here?
Well, this makes it official. This process started, of course, back during the primaries when Donald Trump basically cruised through those primaries, right? And his name was actually the only one placed in nomination because he's the only one that even won enough states in order to do that. So the other big difference here, Lindsay, is that compared to 2016, and as Major mentioned, the third consecutive nomination for him, Republicans are even more excited about having him as the nominee than they were back then. And that just shows another data point of how much this party has become his party. We have tracked throughout that Republican voters said they not only were voting for him, but they wanted the party to show loyalty to him. It really is in many ways unprecedented, at least in modern polling, the amount in which that this party has oriented itself around one person. You see it in the platform. You see it in their approach. You see it in the number of Republicans, nearly half, who say that they are not just supporting Donald Trump, but members of the MAGA movement. All of that comes together, and in this, they'll continue to do the roll call of the delegates. He'll get them all, but that's where we are.
And you see it in the RNC itself. The RNC is Trump's RNC. He's essentially remolded it in his image.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And I think that's reflected not only in the platform, but also then in the approach. And then we're going to talk about the down ballot races. We're going to talk about watching Senate candidates. We saw this during their primaries. Are they running to be someone that Donald Trump will endorse, right? Are they running for someone to appeal to that MAGA base? And then, of course, the question becomes, how do they broaden that out? How do they broaden out that appeal? All of that comes out of and speaks to who's running and where they're running, and the RNC as well.
You mentioned the primaries. We did see Nikki Haley have some minor successes, not enough to get her competitive enough with Trump. But she has released the delegates, those that she can. It's my understanding some states it doesn't matter. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, states each have their individual rules. Now, the Republican Party, by and large, says that its delegates, when they're selected, they are bound to vote for the candidate that won them. And that assures, of course, in this case, Donald Trump getting those delegates. There are a handful of states where Nikki Haley or whoever won them cannot just release them. They still have to be bound to the winner. And what I suspect will happen here is that they will go ahead and vote for Donald Trump in any case, because the party's going to want to show that unity. But it also speaks to something larger. Throughout the primaries, we were often talking about how Nikki Haley was getting, let's say, a quarter of the vote in some states, even when she lost. And there were suspicions, well, could he bring the rest of the party over and together? By every indication we have in the polling, he has. So that even folks who voted for Nikki Haley in the primaries and are Republicans, Donald Trump is now getting 95% of Republican voters. That's different, though, from independents who crossed over and voted for Nikki Haley in the primaries, from even some Democrats who may have crossed over into the primaries for Nikki Haley, which was underpinning some of her support. But by and large, you're seeing a unified party right now.
What is the polling showing about down-ballot races? Because, of course, one of the criticisms of current President Biden is that he will essentially drag the ticket down, impact down-ballot races as he battles his own politics and within members of his own party. What does the polling show us about how down-ballot races are looking, control of the House, control of the Senate right now? Well,
and that's important because we're going to see a competitive Senate control and we're going to see a competitive House control. Often gets lost in all the talk about the presidency. Two things on that. One is that, by and large, the Democratic Senate candidates have been running ahead of Joe Biden in these battleground states where we have polled. That gives them some confidence, and yet, because Joe Biden is not getting the same amount of Democratic enthusiasm for turnout as Donald Trump is from Republicans, you've got to think that Democrats are looking at that and going, well, wait a second, if the top of the ticket is not inspiring that kind of turnout, that could affect, perhaps negatively, Democratic Senate and House candidates. And I think that's going to be a big topic of discussion, certainly something that we do see in the polling.
Okay, Major, we'll go ahead and send it back to you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Lindsay. I'm joined here in Fiserv Forum by Nancy Cook, Senior National Political Reporter for Political. Nancy, your impressions of the afternoon and the JD Vance news.
Well, I think that the JD Vance news is not hugely surprising. We've known that he was going to be, he's been on the short list for a while. He had huge support from the Trump family. Don Jr. really wanted him. And he just has like a group of operatives around him who have really been pushing for him. I think that.
And he's been auditioning in a very public way. And look, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about auditioning, that's not a derisive way of describing how former President Trump thinks about these things. He really does think in ways where he wants people to prove themselves on his terms.
Absolutely. And Vance really has proved himself the last few weeks. He was responsible for setting up a huge fundraiser in California for former President Trump, which brought in a bunch of money and also sort of bringing along the crypto industry. He has been an attack dog on television, at multiple key points of that campaign, and you just can't discount that. And also, he's young. I mean, I think the Trump campaign feels like he will stack up really well in the vice presidential debate against Kamala Harris because he's young, he's a Marine, he's very good on TV, and he's very sharp on his feet.
Talk to me about the fundraising angle, because Peter Thiel plays prominently in JD Vance's political pedigree and is a possible pathway into financial resources that the Trump campaign has identified as necessary and might now have a better access to.
Absolutely. JD Vance has ties both in Silicon Valley, but you have to remember that he also worked in private equity for a while. And so, it's sort of a signal to donors in finance who have been reluctant to support Trump, although we do see them coming off the sidelines, that their VP pick is sort of one of them at least.
And a access point in the future, possibly. And Finn Gomez and I were discussing this. I'd like your perspective, Nancy, for President Biden's reelection campaign. No three states are more central to the Electoral College map at this point, as we understand the map, than Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It is my sense, in the mere moments after this announcement, that there's going to be a bus that JD Vance is going to be on that's basically going to just circle those three states over and over and over. And it's going to be relentless, grassroots JD Vance in those three states, in addition to former President Trump. But what you do with a vice presidential pick is you sort of assign a political task. And the task at hand is to move into those states, it seems to me.
Absolutely. And I know just from talking with Trump world sources that, part of the calculation was who could help, which vice presidential pick could help them win over voters. And there was a sense that if you had picked Senator Rubio, he would have helped with Hispanic voters. But JD Vance, they felt like could really help them lock up the Rust Belt and those swing states that you mentioned. And I think that that was a huge part of the calculus as well.
How much do you think his age is a factor in this for the nation? 39 years old, very short stint in the United States Senate. We learned this weekend of the vulnerabilities, the potential for terrible things happening in this country in a political context. Everyone's talking about pulling back from that, but the specter looms over this entire campaign. It will not possibly not loom over this campaign until it ends.
Absolutely. And he is, he's just 39, as you said. He's very young. He has a young family. And I think that that will be, that is a way to signal to Republican voters, if anything did happen to former President Trump, there is someone young who could step in. Not just that, but I think that, Trump can only serve one term and really wants to sort of set up a successor. And that's what he's going to do with Vance. I mean, Vance is going to be sort of the MAGA movement successor to him for 2028, when there's also a really strong bench of Democratic governors.
No question about that. And as this convention begins to play out, I want to let our audience know how things are going. We're working through the delegate roll call. It's all formulaic now. We saw just a few moments ago over the top. It's all official. But there are some delegations we're going to be preparing to listen to. We're going to listen to the North Carolina delegation, the Arkansas delegation, and the Virginia delegation, because those who will announce their delegates figure prominently in current Republican Party politics. Mark Robinson in North Carolina is the Republican nominee for governor. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Arkansas, sitting governor, former press secretary in the Trump White House, and of course Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who, Nancy, I don't know if you picked this up this afternoon, but there was a little bit of last-minute buzz around Glenn Youngkin.
There was. I thought, well, that could just be a real surprise.
That could be a real surprise, and it could be like Virginia. That's going to be this electoral play for the campaign. Didn't play out that way, but it was clear that there was last-second Youngkin buzz here in Milwaukee.
Well, not just that, but you have to remember that Youngkin will be done with his term. He will be done with his gubernatorial term. And so I could see him getting a job in the Trump administration at some point. Not the VP pick, but, some sort of cabinet post.
It's worth pointing out, to pick up on Nancy's point, that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and this is something that Virginia's always had in its modern era, it's unusual. Governors only serve one term.
I know, right?
I mean, it's a really big deal.
It's very unusual. It's like you learn the job and then you're out.
And then you're out, exactly. So we will be waiting for those delegations when they come up. But in the meantime, Nancy, as we started our coverage, I said, welcome to a national party convention like no other in the modern era. I mean, we just can't overlook. We can't sort of like, oh, well, that was yesterday. No. What happened on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania is a trauma that will flow through this convention and will flow through the Democratic National Convention in certain ways, things that they might have contemplated saying that they won't say in the ways that they were thinking about, and the remainder of this campaign. It was such a shocking set of events, and we're going to get the first sort of expression of those events, how they're internalized by the Republican Party here, but the nation will continue to internalize this until November 5th.
Absolutely, and we saw sort of a bipartisan outpouring for former President Trump. Everybody sort of coming out and saying, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. We're so sorry this happened to you. And I think it is a moment, a source told me it's a moment for Trump where he has a huge amount of sympathy. And just politically, I think that they are going to try to use that this week to appeal to new voters who may have discounted him, swing state voters or white suburban women who they've had a problem with. Their need to expand their coalition beyond the Republican primary base. And I think that sort of building on this theme of unity that we've seen Trump talking about on Truth Social will extend throughout the week as they try to do that.
And I think the most obvious manifestation of that relook and that emphasis on at least party unity came yesterday, when the former president's campaign and those leading this convention reversed course and invited Nikki Haley, who was not to appear here, who was not disinvited, but wasn't even in the conversation about being invited. Now she will have a primetime slot on Tuesday.
Absolutely.
What do you think that tells us?
Well, I think it tells us that they are trying to appear like they're rising above sort of divisiveness and hatred, coursing through the political
And their own
discourse.
internal disagreements. I mean, remember, famously, during the primaries, former President Trump referred to Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, served as his first UN ambassador, as bird brain.
Right, for weeks and weeks on
Dismissively,
end.
yes.
Well, I also think, they are really underwater with white suburban women who feel really put off by the abortion restrictions that the Republican Party has espoused over the last 2 years and the overturning of Dobbs. And I think that, having Nikki Haley on board is also, an attempt to try to appeal to that group.
Interesting in that light, JD Vance doesn't help much there. JD Vance has a very strong, and this is the orientation, this is their phraseology, pro-life position. And in Ohio, when there was a referendum on this very question, Ohio amended its constitution to make room for abortion rights in a kind of a surprise result. The magnitude, not necessarily the ultimate result, but how large that majority in Ohio was. So J.D. Vance doesn't necessarily help in that part of the Republican Party communication.
But I think so much of their strategy right now is to expand the coalition by appealing to young black men and Hispanics. And I think J.D. Vance can help with that because he is also young. He's very online. He's an attack dog. I think he will carry the president's message. And so I think he will, build on that.
Nancy, hold on for just 1 second. I want to go back to the floor to talk to Ed O'Keefe, who is moved from Ohio to North Carolina, the ever intrepid Ed O'Keefe. Ed, take it away. Oh, well, that was a misread of the situation on the floor, Nancy. Ed O'Keefe is probably intrepid as ever, probably moving. And when you're moving, ladies and gentlemen, the microphone sometimes goes with you, sometimes it doesn't. This is what live television is like, an ever-evolving event like a national party convention. So, Nancy, continuing the conversation. Anything else about this first day that you're looking for, that you're going to be sort of analyzing tonight as this moves into the primetime hours and we get out of the official party business, convention business?
Well, what I'm looking for is, each day sort of has a theme. Right. And so today they're really talking about the economy and what they're dubbing as wealth. And so I'll just be interested to see how they talk about that. So much of their message has been, Biden has been terrible on inflation. But I'm curious to see, if that message sort of expands beyond that. And also if they talk more about what Trump would do in a second term if he's reelected on the economy, rather than just sort of bashing grocery prices under Biden.
And that's an interesting observation, Nancy. I'm just being handed a note very quickly from my producer, Arden Fari. So, again, we're in live television. This is ever evolving. J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, got a call. The note has been handed me. I'm reading the note, so follow with me, folks. J.D. Vance, the Ohio Republican senator, got the call from former President Trump 20 minutes before the Truth Social post. That's an indication, Nancy, of the what I've come to expect in the Trump world. Things happen quickly, and things happen in a very tight sequence, entirely driven by former President Trump.
Absolutely. And, even until, I got here on Saturday, even until then, I think Trump was still having conversations with the candidates, up until that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, about, what they would bring. He was still sort of interviewing them, and he was still competing. And my reporting shows that, he didn't really let Senator Rubio or Governor Burgum know that they were not the picks, also till right before that. Everybody was clued in, just really 30 minutes before the Truth Social.
And the point to make there, ladies and gentlemen, is not only does former President Trump drive this process, and everyone around him knows he drives it, but he drives it in his way to, and this is a skill that he has developed, and the country, at least for the Republican Party, has fully embraced. He understands how to build drama and how to leave things unresolved and how to have things sort of build, build, build into a kind of mini crescendo. This isn't the ultimate crescendo. Trust me, in the next 3.5 days, we'll have more crescendos here. Mark my words. But this is a mini crescendo entirely directed by the former president.
Absolutely, and he was just building suspense throughout it. And, I feel like, there's a chance that we may see him later today in the arena, in which case, that will be a very suspenseful moment. He will be out in public since his assassination attempt.
Right.
And
Nancy, if I had a vast fortune, which I don't, I don't even have a nominal fortune, but whatever fortune I might possess, I would bet all of it that he will be here tonight, the former president, in one way or another.
I would too.
To electrify this convention, to personify his sense of, I survived, I'm here, we're together, and we are going to take this moment and launch this convention in a way that I know the former President Trump will want to think of as memorable and want to convey visually as memorable. I want to go back down to the convention. We are one delegation away. We're going to listen in. We'll go through that first delegation. Then we're going to listen to North Carolina, Arkansas, and Virginia. Let's go to the floor, ladies and gentlemen.
Donald J. Trump.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures, the U.S. Virgin Islands, 4 votes, President Trump. North Carolina. North Carolina, 74 delegates.
Madam Secretary, I am Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, and God willing, I will be the next governor of North Carolina. North Carolina is the Tar Heel state. North Carolina is the home of the longleaf pine, and North Carolina is indeed, the state that is and always will be first in flight. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the state of North Carolina, I am directed that the state to cast 62 votes for America's Braveheart and the next president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, for president, and 12 votes in accordance with the rules.
North Carolina, 62 votes, President Trump, 12 votes to be cast pursuant to the rules and procedures of this convention. Arkansas, 40 delegates.
Madam Secretary, Chairman Wadley, I am Joseph Wood, Chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas, the natural state, the land of opportunity, home of the 47th Governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Yes. Also home of the National Federation of Republican Women, Julie Harris, Johnny Cash, Al Green, and the Little Rock 9 Civil Rights Movement. We cast our 40 votes to continue to fight and save America with Donald J. Trump. Our votes for Donald J. Trump. Woo big Louie!
Arkansas, 40 votes, President Trump. Virginia, 48 delegates.
Madam Secretary, on behalf of the great Commonwealth of Virginia, named last week by CNBC as America's top place to do business. Home to 850,000 of the greatest Americans, our military and veteran heroes. Home to Washington, Madison, Monroe, the first governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the voice of liberty, Patrick Henry, and home to Thomas Jefferson, who penned the most immortal words that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Proudly, as governor of Virginia, along with our great chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, Rich Anderson, we cast our delegate votes for the next president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and his vice president, JD Vance.
Virginia, 42 votes, President Trump. 6 votes to be cast pursuant to the rules and procedures of the convention. Michigan, 55 delegates.
Madam Chairwoman, I rise from the great state of Michigan, where the Republican Party was founded under the Oaks on July 6, 1854.
The roll call of delegates continues here on the convention floor in the Fiserv Forum. Nancy Cook, final thoughts on the day. I mean, it's only half over, so I don't mean your final thoughts. I mean your near final thoughts.
I mean, I think it's just, you know, the last month of the election has been so wild and so surprising, from Biden's performance in the debate to the assassination attempt.
And the intervening 2 weeks of Democratic turmoil about what the debate performance did or didn't mean to the future of the president's re-election bid.
So I just think that the tone and tenor of the election is sort of shifting week by week at this point. And it does seem like Trump has a huge advantage at this point, but so much has changed in the last month that, you know, TBD on what happens.
Let me just ask you before you go, Nancy, because it happened this morning, though it feels, because political news moves so rapidly and things that just happened can sometimes feel like they happened so much longer ago than they actually did. There was a significant legal development today.
Yes.
Let us not forget, ladies and gentlemen, we haven't even talked about it, not even for 5 seconds. Eileen Cannon, the district federal judge, dismissed the classified documents case and allegations of obstruction of justice, not only against former President Trump, but the 2 other named defendants. Yes, that can be appealed. Yes, that can be reviewed judicially, but nevertheless, that will be part and parcel of the conversation tonight and throughout this convention.
Absolutely, and legal experts really thought that that was the strongest and most damning case against the former president, you know, that he had kept and hid classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, you know, where club members sort of come and go, you know, during the season.
Not secured as they should be, and there were gentle attempts to retrieve them and conversations and efforts that did not manifest themselves to the satisfaction of the government. Then an FBI raid under a search warrant authorized by a judge, and then the charges, and all of that now, for the moment, legally off the board.
I think that the former President Trump has just had tremendous luck legally in the last 6 months, and part of it comes from, you know, judges and justices he appointed, like his 3 picks for the Supreme Court that ruled in his favor in the immunity case. But also, you know, he's just had tremendous luck with this documents case getting dismissed. You know, the sentencing for his hush money trial in New York, where there were 34 felony convictions, was essentially pushed off because of the Supreme Court ruling. He's just had a lot of things legally go his way.
And speaking of that 34 felony conviction in New York, here at the convention site in Milwaukee, Nancy, I'm sure you've seen them. There are T-shirts that people can and do buy that say, "I'm voting for the felon."
Oh, yes, it's a point of pride here. It's not, you know, it's part of this whole narrative that MAGA world feels, you know, that Trump survived 2 impeachment attempts. He's survived these, like, legal cases where people are trying to drag him down. And now you add to that, he survived an assassination attempt.
Perseverance, a theme here. Nancy Cook, such a great pleasure. Thanks so much for all your help. Lindsay, back to you in New York.
Nancy Major, thanks so much. Anthony is still here with me. And Anthony, we were discussing here at the Broadcast Center, Nikki Haley. She had released her 97 delegates, and you pointed something out to me in the proceedings as we're watching them live.
Yeah, just to kind of button up that earlier conversation, it didn't sound like they actually said Nikki Haley. They didn't. I didn't hear them when they came to states like North Carolina and Virginia, where she, in fact, won a handful of delegates. So what they did was they said, well, pursuant to the rules, those votes will be cast, but they didn't say Nikki Haley. And what I think happens there is they want to show a unanimous front. They want to show a unified front. And so that's how they get that through the rules.
Let's keep pulling at that thread of JD Vance, political newcomer, 39 years old, been Ohio senator, junior senator for a year and a half. Let's go back to 2022. He narrowly won against Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan had actually tried to distance himself from the Democratic Party. JD Vance had tried to tie Tim Ryan to Biden's economic policies, of course, inflation, what people are feeling when they go to the grocery store, et cetera. Vance had never held public office before. He was a Marine veteran, venture capitalist. Remind us of 2022, how close, how expensive that race was, and really what put him over the edge.
Expensive, but I actually want to rewind back to 2012, where I think part of this story begins, which is that Barack Obama won Ohio when he ran for re-election in 2012. Since then, you have seen a shift in Ohio, along with elsewhere, specifically in white working class and white non-college degree holding voters away from the Democratic Party and into the Republican camp. And so go back then to 2022, where J.D. Vance does well among that core, what is now a core part of the Republican Party, of the MAGA base, of Donald Trump's party. And I think what you're going to see is, can he then address or take some of that appeal, build on that appeal for Donald Trump? Donald Trump won 2/3 of white non-college voters nationwide in 2020, right? So can he build on that? Yes, as Major said, as you've said, across the Rust Belt, so to apply the lessons of Ohio out there. And then the second part of that is it might signal a kind of theory of the case, which is that this is a turnout election. And in that sense, Donald Trump and the Republicans are going to try to make sure that every part of what they already have as the base is out there and is motivated. And some of the themes that you've heard J.D. Vance talk about, that you hear Donald Trump talk about the economy, about that kind of populist rhetoric, some call it, those are things that could be motivating. And that, again, speaks to this idea that this election is less about persuasion and more about turnout.
Of course, we continue to watch the roll call here in Milwaukee right now. I believe South Dakota is up, if not New Mexico. We only have a few more states left to go, even though Trump has already reached his delegate count, 1,215 needed. We're going to continue watching the RNC right now, but we are going to take a quick break. Stay right here. You are streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
I'm John Dickerson. Join me for the Daily Report, weekdays on CBS News 24/7.
Tonight.
What are the delegates here in Milwaukee saying in the aftermath of the Trump assassination attempt?
Then how investigators are trying to determine the shooter's motive and how the shooting is reshaping Trump's convention speech on the CBS Evening.
Good afternoon. It is just about 4 p.m. here in New York, 3 p.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Donald Trump has officially won the Republican nomination for president. The former president passed the highly coveted threshold of 1,215 delegates during the roll call vote. And in about half an hour, he's scheduled to introduce the convention to his VP pick, Ohio Senator JD Vance, announced this afternoon. The former self-proclaimed Never Trump guy has spent recent months earning the trust of the former president as he auditioned for the role. Vance is a freshman senator from Ohio, a Marine veteran, and he took office last year after working as a venture capitalist. Let's get to CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett at the Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee covering the convention. Major, if I'm not mistaken, we are down to just the last 1 or 2 states.
We are indeed. Vermont and Hawaii will round out the formal call of the delegates to complete the process, which you have just outlined, Lindsay, has already become official. Former President Trump is, for the 3rd consecutive presidential cycle, never before happened in Republican Party political history, the nominee of the Republican Party to seek the presidency in 2024. And that history-making 3 in a row is worth noting and worth pausing on for just a second. There have been a lot of very successful Republican politicians who've become president of the United States. Want to go now to the floor of the convention for Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, to carry on the official announcement of the calling of the delegates. Let's listen in to Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House.
387 votes for President Donald J. Trump. Let's make it official. Accordingly, the chair announces that President Donald J. Trump, having received a majority of the votes entitled to be cast at the convention, has been selected as the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States. The chair is pleased to appoint the following to serve as the escort committee for President Donald J. Trump: Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Tiffany Trump, Ivanka Trump.
It is officially official. Former President Donald Trump, the Republican Party nominee. You see the delegate total right there on the screen, 2,394, as articulated in an official sense, was in no way in doubt. But these things have an official gloss to them, and the gloss matters historically. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, presiding over the convention at this stage to make that announcement. What we expect here in the intervening few moments is a vote by the delegates. We are led to believe, and we'll see how it plays out, but we are led to believe it will be by acclamation of the chosen running mate for former President Trump, Ohio Republican Senator JD Vance. Joining me now here in the Fiserv Forum, Hannah Knowles, national political reporter with the Washington Post. Hannah, there is a musical interlude. I'm very glad we have this headset on. Even with the headset, ladies and gentlemen, truth be told, it's pretty loud here, so we will talk through the noise, Hannah. I hope you can hear me and hear me clearly. Your thoughts on JD Vance being added to the ticket? I know in a sense it wasn't a surprise because he was in the final three contenders, but still a significant move for former President Trump.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people thought it would be Vance for a while because he is sort of the guy that you most associate with Trumpism. He's just the essence of what Trump wants his surrogate to be, out there defending his every word, his every move. And you saw, after the shooting this weekend, JD Vance was really out front in criticizing Democrats' rhetoric and linking that to the shooting, even though they're still investigating the motive. So he's really just a bulldog for Trump.
And that is the historical role of any running mate, to be the aggressor. Of course, in the era of Trump politics, there is no one who's more of an aggressor than the former president. That was true in 2016, 2020, and throughout this entire campaign. But Hannah, I think it's just worth noting, as I mentioned, third consecutive nomination for Donald Trump, making him a continuous factor in Republican Party politics starting in 2015, one that the party has not been able to take its eye off of and not deny. And even though this sounds like, well, of course he's going to be the nominee in Milwaukee, he's still a convicted felon. He faces other felony counts and other criminal charges. As the former leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, the once majority leader, now minority leader, Mitch McConnell, said after the January 6th riot, former President Trump, then the sitting president, was morally and ethically and possibly legally culpable for that riot. All of that as a backdrop would have disqualified anyone else, not former President Trump.
Yeah, I think his nomination did not look inevitable at, the beginning of the primary process. You had a lot of people putting stock in Ron DeSantis, and then once Trump was indicted, that's when his polls really just took off. And a lot of people would say he's gotten a lot of breaks in those criminal cases you mentioned. We saw that just today with the case in Florida that got dismissed. And so, what used to feel like a massive obstacle to his candidacy has kind of melted away in so many ways.
And Hannah, I'm glad you raised that, because for delegates here, and the country sort of asked this question, aren't you ashamed of former President Trump, all these criminal indictments? What they tell me is, no, we're not ashamed of Trump. We're ashamed of what we believe has happened to the justice system going after this political figure. They believe, almost to a person that I've talked to, Hannah, and I encountered this all across the country during the primary and the caucus process, Republicans have internalized this sense that is exactly consistent with the former president's rhetoric, that he is a political leader, he is being attacked judicially, and that's what's wrong, not him.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the shooting this weekend, that just only intensified this sense that he is under attack on multiple fronts. And I think for a lot of people, that validated this feeling that they've had throughout the election.
How do you think that's going to rhetorically filter through this convention? That sense that he's a target, or he's been assailed, he's been attacked, but now the former president's even announcing through an interview in a newspaper published this morning, the Washington Examiner, that he's rewritten his convention speech, that he wants to have a different tone, a different approach here. How do you think, and we don't know, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but in general, what is your sense of how that's going to filter through at least his approach to this convention?
Yeah, I think my colleagues have reported that the instinct is to kind of dial back the rhetoric rather than dial it up in this moment. And like you said, that is reflected in Trump's plans for his own speech. I think the question is whether everyone speaking over these next few days gets that message, right? I mean, there's a lot of people involved here, a lot of people taking this stage. There's a lot of chances for someone to kind of break from the message of unity.
Hannah, you've done some thorough reporting on the platform. It is a Republican Party platform that they like to say here is shorter, more concise, and I've covered a lot of Republican conventions. I never thought the Republican Party platform was written entirely by lobbyists, but that's sort of one of the talking points here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I covered those party platform. There were lobbyists there. They were party activists. But anyway, that's their orientation to the past. I'm not sure that's exactly true, but that's their talking point. What matters is that this thing is shorter, more concise, but also how it deals with the question of abortion and abortion access in a post-Roe era.
Yeah, and so what they did was they kind of softened the language on abortion. They're no longer calling for an amendment to the Constitution to say that embryos and fetuses have a right to life. They're no longer calling for a 20-week national abortion ban, and they're really framing it as an issue for the states. There's some anti-abortion groups that have still kind of spun this as a win for them, pointing to some of the language, but overall it really is a backing off of some of the provisions they've had on that for so many years.
For so many years and so many previous platforms.
Yeah.
And it is entirely reflective of what former President Trump wants Republicans to say about this issue, knowing that it's not a universal winner and that you've got to win elections and you've got to sort of tiptoe around this a little bit. That platform, from your reading, is somewhat reflective of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, Trump's advisors signaled early on, we want to cut down the platform, in part because they just didn't want to give their opponents ammunition. And they said that in a memo that they laid out. I mean, why would we give these people words to use against us on abortion?
Right, and on other
issues as well.
In the platform as well. And look, Hannah, I know, having covered lots of campaigns, most Americans don't run around carrying the platform of the parties with them and scrutinizing it line by line, but they are a statement of principles, a statement of priorities. And in this sense, it lists the things that Republicans believe have gone wrong under President Biden's leadership, and we're going to hear that from the podium throughout this convention.
Yeah, and I think that the platform as a whole, it's really just Trump's campaign points. I've talked to Republicans who are very supportive of Trump who say, this is a great campaign document. It's not so much a statement of what the Republican Party stands for the next few decades, per se, and it just kind of exemplifies this melding of Trump and the Republican Party. They are one and the same now.
Hannah, as you know, national political conventions are all about cover songs. That's what the rock and roll you hear in the background is. It's a cover of Cheap Trick, I Want You to Love Me. That's not a problem here, ladies and gentlemen. The delegates love former President Trump. Hannah Knowles, Washington Post, thanks so very much for your time and your expertise. Lindsay, back to you in New York.
All right, Major Garrett, thanks so much. So Anthony Salvanto, a CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, still here with me. As we watch, it's really part official and then part pageantry and a party.
Yeah, because what you've got there is a party that has been not just voting for and supporting Donald Trump, but demanding loyalty to him, looking for loyalty to him. You saw that throughout the primaries. Major was talking earlier about the conviction and the T-shirt that he said, I'm voting for a felon. Part of that's really important here, and that is the sense that throughout the primaries, Republican voters told us that they would, A, see him as still fit for office, even if convicted, and they followed through by voting for him as well. But also that narrative that came through, which was that the prosecution was political in nature. And that was something we saw throughout the polling, throughout the primaries, and still today. Once they dismiss that as politically motivated, then it no longer carries the weight of, oh, that's a negative on our candidate. And so that's how you sort of connect those dots between there and then here feeling like he should be not only the nominee, but is fit for office, and why, quite frankly, even after the conviction, the numbers did not move very much in the polling. You got a little bit of a shift away from Donald Trump, from some folks who weren't as sure after the conviction, but it proved to be very transient, because after that first debate, it kind of came back. So not a lot of impact there.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you. And of course, as we continue to watch everything happening on your screen in Milwaukee at the RNC, we are expecting Vice presidential nominee JD Vance to be introduced within the hour. When that happens, we will take you there live. But we do want to get you caught up on some other news happening, and we will do that right after this break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving